Hi grade 8s, welcome to today's lesson on radius, diameter and circumference. We're looking at the evidence of learning for week 5, lesson 1 about circles and pi. Now the first thing we need to know before we start trying to calculate radius, diameter and circumference are the actual definitions of what the radius is, what the diameter is and what the circumference actually means. So looking at this diagram here, we can see very clearly that the radius is this line from the center of the circle to the outside of the circle. So the radius is exactly halfway through the circle. When we look at the diameter, however, the diameter is all the way through from one end of the circle to the other, passing through the center. Now the diameter, you may have noticed, is exactly twice as long as the radius. So if the radius is halfway through, and the diameter is all the way through, then we know that the diameter is exactly 2 times the length of the radius. And that will help us figure out the equations that we need to use to calculate both the radius and the diameter, depending on what information we are given. So the general formula to calculate the radius, if you are given the diameter, then the formula for a radius is the diameter divided by 2, or half of the diameter. The opposite of that is if you are trying to calculate the diameter but you're given a radius, then the formula for the diameter is 2 times the radius, or 2r. So if you're given a diameter and you're trying to work out the radius, so for example, if you were given the diameter like that, you would use the formula d over 2. However, if you were given the radius of a circle instead, you would use 2 times r. So those are your two formulas to work out the radius and the diameter of a circle. Now looking at the circumference. Now the circumference is just a fancy word for the perimeter of a circle. So the outside distance around a circle. And this is when we introduce that number pi. Now the formula for the circumference once again depends on whether you have a diameter or a radius. Now if you're given a radius, we use the general formula 2 times pi times the radius. And that is the most common form of the circumference equation that you will come across, 2 pi r. However, if you're given a diameter, the formula for circumference then is pi times the diameter. Now you'll notice at the top here, 2 times pi times r. Well, 2 times r, as we saw above, is the same thing as the diameter. And that's why pi times the diameter is the same thing as 2 times pi times r, because another way of writing that is pi times 2r. And we can see that that there is exactly the same as 2r up here, which is the same as pi times d. But as I said, 2 pi r will be the most common form of the equation, but if you're given the diameter instead, you can use pi d. It depends on the situation and the circles that you're looking at. All right, let's give these two circles here a go. So we are trying to calculate the radius, the diameter, and the circumference for both of these circles. So let's do circle number 1. So first thing, we're trying to work out the radius. And for this question here, it's quite simple. It's telling us the radius already, which is just 5. Now there's no units here, so we can just leave it as the number. Or if you want to, you can make up some units. Let's do meters instead. So our radius is 5 meters. Now the second thing we need to calculate is the diameter. And if you remember our formula, if we're given a radius and we're trying to calculate the diameter, we use the formula 2r. And we know that our radius is 5, so we have 2 times 5 meters, and our answer will be 10 meters. And the final thing we need to calculate is the circumference. Now if you remember, we have 2 options for our circumference formula, but in this particular circle we're given a radius. So let's use our general formula, 2 times pi times our radius. So our next line, 2 pi r, means 2 times pi times our radius, which was 5 meters. And if you want to, on your next line, you can simplify that even more by combining the 2 and the 5. And 2 times 5 will be 10 meters, so it's 10 meters times by pi. And just as a reminder, I might write this over here, that pi is equal roughly to 3.14. In reality, we know that that extends out until infinity. But for the purposes of this working out, we can just write 3.14. In your calculator, you should definitely use the pi button, and that will give you the full digits and the most accurate way of calculating this. And multiplying that by 10, quite simply, we end up with 31.14 31.4 meters. And so the circumference of this circle was 31.4 meters. Okay, now our second circle has a diameter of 16. I might even just draw this up here so I don't forget. So when we work out the radius, remember our radius formula when we are given a diameter is the diameter divided by 2. And for this example, our diameter is 16 meters, which we then divide by 2. So our radius will be 8 meters. Now the diameter of this circle is already given, and that is very simply just 16 meters. And the last thing we need to calculate is the circumference. Now for this question, we're given a diameter, so I'm going to choose to use our second formula, which was pi times the diameter. And very simply, we have pi times 16 meters, which was our diameter. Pi is 3.14, and so we would use our calculator, use the pi button, and write pi times 16 meters. And the answer you should get is 50.3 meters. And that is how you calculate the radius, diameter, and circumference of those two circles.